Hello, my name is Rand. You're about to watch a free preview lesson from the Accelerated World Building course from World Building University. In other words, if you went to worldbuilding.university and found this course, you'd see that at least one lesson can be previewed. This is that lesson, minus what I'm saying right now. This lesson is on how to decide whether we need to invent Undead for our setting or story. Please like the video and subscribe to see more videos as they're uploaded. Thanks for watching. In this lesson to accelerate our world building by ruling out items we don't need to invent, we'll talk about whether we need to or want to create our own undead instead of using the standard ones. The goal is to determine whether we need to invent undead. We're going to evaluate 3 scenarios to make a quick decision. We're also going to look at reasons to invent our own, reasons not to invent our own, and what invention involves. Finally, we're going to talk about my recommendation for what you should do. There are arguably 3 scenarios. The first of these is going to result in a decision to definitely not invent undead. In this case, we don't plan on using undead at all. Our story doesn't need them, our story doesn't want them, and neither do we. In this case, there's really no reason to look into this. In the second scenario, this is going to result in a maybe decision. We might have characters who need something to kill, and we could use undead or we could live without undead. And finally, there's the definitely maybe decision. This could be when we are definitely doing a story using undead. We could use the standard ones, or we could invent our own, and maybe we're going to do both. We'll take a deeper look at all of these next. In scenario 1, we don't plan to use undead at all. Well, if that's the case, there's no reason to add what we don't need. Wanting to invent or use undead but not needing to do so is okay, but we invite more work for ourselves. Why not avoid world building overwhelm by just skipping this altogether? In that sense, you could stop watching this lesson right now, but you may want to continue watching it just to gain some insight into the scenarios where you might want to use undead. That brings us to scenario 2. Our story might need monsters. And the reason for this is that characters are often traveling from one place to another across the land or breaking into somewhere they aren't supposed to get into easily. That's where the adventure is, right? And the drama, tension, and conflict is all there. But we have many things to choose from. We don't need undead at all, not to mention ones we've spent time inventing. Still, we can if we want to. If you're curious, follow along, but if not, you can almost move on now. Here are some of the things that we could use for that instead of undead, such as goblins, ogres, or anything else from this list, or even a species or a race that we have invented, or another standard one such as elves or dwarves. That brings us to scenario 3. Our story definitely features undead. In fact, it could heavily feature them, so much so that our story cannot happen without them. But we could use standard public domain ideas instead. These mean ghosts, zombies, skeletons, and more. Public domain means we don't need permission to use them. We don't need to pay anyone royalties. We can act as if they belong to us as far as our usage goes. However, we can only make so many modifications to them before they cease to resemble what people expect. That can be good, but then maybe we're really creating one of our own and starting with something familiar. And we could invent our own. Now, the reasons to invent our own include that we want to do something new. Partly because we might be bored with the same old ideas, whether this means using them ourselves or just being tired of other people using them. Maybe this is even one reason we became creative to begin with. I personally have seen so many stories with vampires that I'm not really interested in how the vampires behave and act or what they can do because I already know all of this. Now, we could have a specific idea we would like to realize, and this is one of the best reasons to invent undead, or anything in world building. We might want to challenge our audience and keep them guessing. What do I mean by that? Well, if we know vampires must be staked in the heart to die, and someone stabs them in the stomach with a sword, we already know they aren't going to die. So where's the surprise for us? Well, there isn't any. When we start fresh, no one has any idea what to expect, and this can really raise the tension level, and it can alleviate some boredom. We don't like being tied to what someone else has envisioned or the audience expectations is another reason to do something new. I personally used to really chafe at this and just feel frustrated that I had to conform to expectations. Now, we might have also used public domain ideas before and don't want to repeat ourselves. If we've written 5 stories using zombies, for example, maybe we're starting to repeat that. And we could try another public domain idea, of course, but you get the idea. Sooner or later, we've done them to death. Now, we may have underestimated how hard it is to create new undead, and in a way that is a reason to invent them because we may not realize what we are getting ourselves into. The big question for you to ask yourself is, what makes you want to do something original? I would spend a few minutes thinking about this. Now, for reasons not to invent, well, you can use the standard undead because they are public domain, and also no one expects us to invent undead. Inventing them isn't generally done, or at least not in my experience as a reader, so I don't really expect this as a reader, and I am pleasantly surprised provided the idea is a good one. And it's not just a standard undead with only one thing changed. I talk about how to use analogs in world building and have this thing I call the rule of 3. That means make at least 3 significant changes to something before you give it a new name and claim it's yours. We can also use something standard if it fits our need, and therefore there's really no reason for us to make up something new. We can also modify them within limits to suit our needs. And we may not have time to invent something new, and that's a major reason not to go ahead and invent something. That's one really good way to avoid overwhelm and world-building fatigue by not inventing Undead 2 when there are so many other things we really need to do. Also, inventing something new isn't very easy. What does it actually take? Well, let's look at the next slide. Here is what inventing Undead involves. First of all, you're going to need a new name and some nicknames. Without that, it's kind of not going to impress anyone how cool this thing is. When it comes to description, we need their appearance, of course, and we're also going to need their skills, such as their super senses or speed, or they're really hard to kill except in one particular way. Characteristics include things like what it feeds on to exist, and what it can do, like drink your blood and then hear your thoughts or something like that. And then there's whether it leaves a trail or it is smart enough to avoid it. All sorts of things can be thought of here, and the more, the better. When it comes to motives and goals, even the undead wants something, and this is a good way to make our new undead cool. We also need to figure out the life cycle for our undead, such as what the point of origin was. Did someone create this on purpose, or was it the accident of something has happened and it has resulted in this kind of undead? And then there's the question of can they replicate? In some stories, we see this idea that an undead has bitten someone, for example, and then that person is going to become one in the future. And there's also the question of whether it can be truly destroyed or not. A major subject we need to figure out is where are they found and why are they found in that location? And then, of course, are they a pack animal or are they solitary? With something like vampires, we see them creating covens, for example, so it doesn't have to be something as rudimentary as a pack animal where they have no intelligence behind their gathering. It could be a very sophisticated gathering. And then, of course, there's combat. If we don't have our undead fighting our characters, there's arguably only so much fright involved in their existence in our story. Finally, let's talk about my recommendation. If you don't need or want undead, don't use one. Otherwise, if you do plan on using one, I would first see if a public domain idea works for your needs and desires. If not, do you have the time to create your own undead? The name is also important, by the way, because feedback is important with all of this, unlike with plants and animals. We need to have something that is pretty cool and that people can easily pronounce and they just identify with this. On that note, one of the best ideas here is if you have an idea already, that is the best reason to go ahead and invent something. But if you're drawing a blank, I would just go ahead and skip this. If you do have an idea, is that idea different and unique enough that people are going to not associate it with something that already exists? And then, of course, there's the good name for it. And can you get feedback from friends and other world builders as to whether this is a good idea? I hope this lesson shed some light on why you might want to create Undead. For a more detailed lesson on how to actually create one, check out World Building University for other courses. Okay, that's the end of the preview. Please check out the video description for a whole bunch of resources that you can click on and get more information about courses and the books that this is based on and a bunch of other stuff. And please remember to like the video and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.